short video is one of a series of short videos that deals with a variety of concepts covered in the chapter on share valuation included in the prescribed textbook. The purpose of these short videos is not to replace the textbook or to minimize the learning required to master the contents of this part of the prescribed learning. The purpose of this short video is to use a more visual method to explain and demonstrate methods used to calculate the average growth rate of dividends that is used to calculate the value of an ordinary share. Students generally grapple with the application and calculations when having to calculate the average growth rate of an ordinary share based on the dividends over a time period. The contents of this video must be studied with focus and comprehension, and many more examples of the concepts must be studied and exercises selected, and the calculations practiced to ensure a complete understanding of this model.
Dear students, the purpose of this video is to explain to you how to calculate the price of a share in a situation where the growth rate of the dividends is not known. Now, you will recall from previous presentations that we could be faced with a scenario where there's a zero growth rate, or we could be presented with a scenario where there is a constant growth rate. And this is now another scenario where the only difference is that initially we have no idea what the growth rate of the dividends is. All we know is that the dividends are actually growing over time. In the example provided here, if you look at the table, you can see that the table provides you with the dividends for a period of 6 years, from 2013 to 2018. And the values are different every year. So in other words, that tells us that there is a growth rate in the dividends, but we don't know what the growth rate is. So therefore, the first thing that we have to do before we can calculate the share price is we have to calculate the actual average growth rate for the dividends over this period. Now you must also realize that the theory and other information relating to this example is to be found in chapter 7 of the prescribed textbook, and you need to study that information as well. In order to resolve this particular situation and calculate the growth rate, we need to actually use the information in the table. Now, there are a couple of important aspects that you need to focus on. The information from this table that is relevant to the calculation are the following. The value of the dividends for the last year, in other words, the most recent year, which in this case is 2018, and the value of the dividends in the very first year that you have when the dividend information became available, which in this case is 2013. Those two values are very important in the calculation. The oldest dividend value and the most recent dividend value. And secondly, you need to determine how many dividend periods you have in your information. Now, a dividend period is the time between 2 years. So in other words, if we calculate the dividend periods, between 2013 and 2014 is one period, 2014 to 15 is another period, 2015 to 2016 is another period, 2016 to 2017 is a fourth period, and 2017 to 2018 is a fifth period. So in other words, although you have 6 dividend values, you have 5 time periods, as I've explained to you how you calculate them. And that is also an important value. Given those values, you can now actually calculate, first of all, the average growth rate, and then use that growth rate to calculate the actual share price of this particular share. Let us first now move on to calculating the actual growth rate. In order to calculate the growth rate, we need to calculate what we call the growth factor. Now, the growth factor can be calculated as follows. The growth factor is the dividend value for 2013 divided by the dividend value for 2018. Now, you will remember from the previous slide that dividend for 2013 is the oldest dividend, and the dividend for 2018 is the most recent dividend. In the table, these two values were 1 Rand and 1 Rand 40. So dividing 1 Rand by 1 Rand 40, we get a growth rate factor of 0.714. This is an important value because we are going to use this value in order to find the actual growth rate. Because the actual growth rate that we are looking for is a percentage value. And this is not a percentage value. In order to find the actual growth rate, you now have two options. There are interest rate factor tables that you need to use in order to get the actual growth rate. Now, these factor tables you will find at the back of your study guide or in Appendix A at the back of your textbook. In the exam, these tables are also attached to the exam paper. These tables look like the following. Here I have an extract of what these tables look like. This is an extract which you will find on page 774, 775 of your prescribed textbook, and it is known as Table A, and it is a present value interest factor table. You will find the same table at the back of the study guide. Now you will recall that in the calculation of the interest factor, I told you there were two values that were important. The one is the values for the beginning and end periods of the dividends, which we used to calculate the interest factor with, which was 0.714. And the other value which I said to you is important is the number of periods that the dividends relate to, which was 5. Now, if you look at this table, you will see on the left-hand side, it lists a number of periods. The actual tables contain more information than this. This is just an extract. And we are looking for period number 5, which is that one. And we are going to work in this line that runs across the table, but for period 5. So that's the only line in this table that we are interested in. The growth factor that we calculated was 0.714. So we now need to look at all these values to find a value that is 0.714 or as close as possible to 0.714. Now if we go across, we get to 747, and then we get to 0.713. We are looking for 0.714. The next value is 0.681. So the value closest to 0.714 in this table is 0.713. And 0.713 in the period line 5 falls in this column. And this column indicates the growth percentage that we are looking for. The growth percentage that relates to our growth factor is 7%. So this is the way in which we now have determined the actual growth rate for the dividends. We What we are saying now is that those dividends that were given to us in the table has an average growth rate of 7% per year. Now, if those dividends every year grow by 7%, it means they are growing by the same percentage. And that should tell you that it's a constant growth rate. So therefore, we can now calculate the share price using a constant growth rate and not a zero growth rate. Let us look at an example. We now have the unknown growth rate. In order to calculate the share price, we now need to adjust the dividend, which is applicable to 2018. And you will recall from the table that the dividend for 2018, which is the current dividend, is R1.40. You will also remember, or you should know, that in order to calculate the dividends, we need the next year's dividend. In other words, we need D1 because this is D0. So in order to obtain dividend D1, which is the dividend for 2019, we need to increase this dividend by 7%, which is what we are doing here. The current dividend plus an increase of 7% gives us the 2019 dividend of R1.50. And now, from here on, it's smooth sailing, because now we have the actual dividend rate, we have the growth rate, and we also have a rate of return, which in this particular instance, then we can calculate the price of the share as follows. The 2019 dividend, which is R1.50, the expected rate of return, which was 15%, and the growth rate, which is 7%, and that takes us back to a share price of R18.75. So in other words, all that was different between this example and the example in a previous video where we dealt with constant growth is that we first had to actually calculate the growth rate in this instance before we could actually calculate the share price. I trust that this helps you to understand how to calculate growth rate. As I've explained to you, you need two values, the oldest and the latest. Divide the one by the other, get the growth rate factor, then go to the interest tables and look up the actual percentage. And then you can do the calculations as required.